He was a veteran, a quiet old man with a cane and tired eyes. The bikers mocked him, his beat-up truck, the way he walked, and one of them shoved him, not knowing that an hour later, he'd be standing in a park, eyes down, swallowed by shame. Welcome to Heartland Stories. I'm Ethan Hale, and here I share true stories about honor, kindness, and quiet strength. Today, I'm going to tell you about a man they thought was a nobody, about the ones who tried to humiliate him only to end up on their knees. This is a story about how disrespecting a veteran can lead to a reckoning no one saw coming. Ready to find out how one careless act turned into a life-changing lesson? Then hit that like button, and let's begin. The heat was thick, like the sun had dropped just low enough to sit on the pavement. Dust curled above the road as an old pickup, faded, dented, with a map of rust tracing the door, rolled up to the pump with a groaning suspension. Frank Miller cut the engine. The truck, like the man, had seen some things. Every rattle was a reminder of time. He pushed the door open with effort, leaned on his cane, and stepped out. His movements were slow, not from weakness, but intention. A veteran who'd learned long ago to save energy where it counted. He wore a light shirt, soaked with sweat, and an old Marine Corps cap, sun-bleached and weathered as if it had served alongside him. Frank pulled out his wallet, slid out a veteran discount card, and made his way to the payment terminal. By the air pump, four young guys lounged around, leather vests, tattoos, the kind of cologne that shows up before they do. They were laughing loud, pointing at the truck. "Hey, check this out," one shouted. "Is that a museum piece or a ride?" Another cracked up, slapping his leg. "I swear, thought those things only showed up in zombie movies. Grandpa here probably still thinks the Korean War's going on." Frank said nothing, walked right by like he hadn't heard. But he had. He heard it all. He just didn't see the need to answer. He'd been in places where silence carried more weight than any word. And this was one of those times. He paid for his gas and grabbed a bottle of water. The cashier, earbuds in, didn't even glance up. "Have a good one," she muttered, eyes locked on her screen. Back at the truck, Frank unscrewed the gas cap with deliberate care. His hands trembled slightly, years leave their mark on bones and joints. But his back stayed straight, until he felt movement behind him. "That junker even start anymore?" One of the bikers sneered, stepping too close. Frank didn't turn around, just answered, calm as ever. "Still runs." "And still runs his mouth," the guy snapped, and shoved Frank hard in the shoulder. The cane slipped from his grip. The old man stumbled, lost his balance, and crashed down onto the sun-baked concrete. A heavy thud. The bottle burst open beside him with a hiss. No yelling, no complaint. He just lay there, breathing shallow, eyes fixed on some point near his own shadow. Then, slowly, with effort, he pulled himself toward the truck, grabbed the door handle, pulled up, steadying against the frame instead of the cane. His face stayed calm, but something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Peace, cold and quiet. He climbed into the cab, shut the door, didn't touch the radio, just turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and came to life. Frank Miller drove away. No words, no glance back. And none of those laughing boys realized that right then. Everything had already started to change. The old pickup rumbled down a faded back street, its tires brushing over a cracked, alligator-skinned road. The sign above Todd's Auto Repair creaked back and forth on its chains, keeping time with the truck's worn-out suspension. The building itself was brick, square, and tired, wedged between a vape shop and a shuttered dry cleaner. Frank didn't come here often, and today, it seemed, maybe he shouldn't have come at all. He pulled under the awning and cut the engine, paused, like a man bracing himself, not for the pain in his hip, though it throbbed with every movement, but for what he already suspected was coming. Then he stepped out, careful not to put too much weight on the left leg. His face, as always, gave nothing away. Inside, the AC buzzed lazily. Behind the counter, a guy in his 30s lounged in a swivel chair like it was his living room. Short hair spiked with gel, earbuds in, eyes glued to his screen playing some loud video. Feet up on the desk like he owned the world. Frank cleared his throat, just loud enough to be heard. "Can I help you?" The guy asked without looking up, voice thick with indifference. "Frank Miller. Got something rattling in the engine." Only happens when I hit the gas. Todd finally pulled out one earbud with a sigh and stood up. He walked out to the truck, gave it a half-hearted loop like he was circling a dumpster, and clicked his tongue. We don't work on stuff like this, he said. This thing's a relic. Parts don't exist anymore. Honestly, what's the point? I'll pay cash, Frank said calmly. Todd shrugged. And about the money. Some things just aren't worth fixing. From the back of the shop, a soft clang of a mop hitting a bucket echoed through the quiet. Lorraine, the janitor, paused mid-step. She was in her 40s, wore a plain work uniform, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She watched the exchange without a word, but you could tell she saw it differently. Frank gave her a nod. No words. He wasn't the type to ask twice. He turned and limped back toward the truck. The limp wasn't dramatic, but it was there, and it cost him. He moved like a man holding himself together out of principle, not strength. Lorraine stepped forward, just a little. Don't mind him, she said gently. He just doesn't know. Frank stopped, opened the door, looked over his shoulder. Not knowing doesn't excuse it. She hesitated, then said a little louder. I saw what happened at the gas station. Frank looked straight at her. His eyes, pale gray, worn, held no anger. Just wait. Time. Truth. They don't know who you are, Lorraine said softly. There was real respect in her voice, the kind you don't fake. He gave her the faintest nod. They don't have to be said. The truck groaned to life with the same tired rattle it always had. He backed out slowly and headed toward the old park on the edge of town. Lorraine stayed in the doorway, watching him go. Todd was already back in his chair, earbuds in, lost again in noise. And the day went on, like nothing had happened. But mile after mile, something inside Frank shifted. Not because of pain, not because of the fall, but because somewhere deep down it hurt more to be invisible than to be pushed. The park was nearly empty, same as it always was this time of day. A few cracked walking paths, overgrown grass, a lone swing set that hadn't heard a child's laugh in years. Frank parked beneath a crooked elm, killed the engine, and with it, the rest of the world seemed to go quiet. He climbed out slowly. His cane tapped the pavement with a soft clack. He hadn't come here often, but he knew this place. Back when the trees were thinner, the benches still smelled like fresh paint instead of weathered wood. He walked a few paces and sat on one of them. The wood creaked under his weight. He let his back rest against the worn slats and exhaled deeply. From the inside pocket of his old jacket, he pulled a worn leather case. He opened it carefully. Inside was a faded photograph, yellowed at the edges and creased from decades of folding. 9 men stood shoulder to shoulder in the frame, faces smeared with dirt, grins meant for each other, not the camera. On the back, still faintly legible, Echo Squad, 2nd Recon, Fu Tai, 71. For the ones who made it back. Frank ran a finger across the image. He knew every face, remembered every voice, like they'd spoken just yesterday. Laughter, voices, real ones, not just memories. Hey, check it out. Zombie Grandpa, someone called. For teenagers strolled along the path nearby, tossing glances his way. One pointed, snickering. Man, he's probably waiting for a telegram from Abraham Lincoln. Another said, chuckling. They weren't cruel, just stupid. Frank didn't look up. He folded the photo, slid it gently back into the case, and tucked it away. He'd heard it all before. The voices change. The ignorance doesn't. The world had stopped listening to old men, especially the quiet ones. He reached into another pocket and pulled out a laminated card. Its edges were frayed, the plastic yellowed with time. Just a few words. For emergency use only. And a phone number. No names. No unit. Just trust. Issued long ago, never spoken of since. He turned the card over. He knew the number by heart. Had for nearly 50 years. He stared at it. And just like that, time slipped. He remembered standing knee-deep in mud under a burning sky when they handed it to him. Don't call unless there's no other option. He didn't call when his wife passed. He didn't call when he buried his son. Not even when cancer had him on his knees during the 3rd round of chemo. He kept quiet. But today wasn't louder. Just emptier. The world had gone too quiet. And he, too unseen. From the other side of the path, a little boy wandered over, juice box in hand. He held it out. Want some? Before Frank could answer, the boy's mother rushed up, grabbed him by the arm. "Don't bother him," she muttered, casting Frank a cautious look like old age was something dangerous. Frank gave the faintest smile. He waved. The boy waved back, confused but smiling. And just like that, the moment passed. Frank leaned into the bench again. Wind rustled through the tree above him. A dog barked somewhere off in the distance. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Not anger, not pain, something older, something deeper. Maybe it was time to remember who he was. And let the world remember, too. The leaves rustled overhead as Frank stared down at the laminated card resting in his palm. It felt like more than plastic, like a shard of a world that used to be, one that hadn't vanished so much as gone silent. The card was warm from the sun, but it carried the weight of something sacred, like a metal no one ever pinned on his chest. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old flip phone, scratched, faded, its buttons worn smooth. He hardly used it, never really needed to. But that number, it had lived in his memory for decades, just like the names behind the photo in his pocket. He flipped the phone open. The screen blinked awake like it hadn't seen light in years. He punched in the digits, slow and steady. His hand didn't tremble, but his breathing deepened. 1 ring. 2. 3. Click. Unit 407. Verify. Frank froze. For just a second, the world went still. Then, like an old engine catching, something inside him locked into place. His voice came out firm, just like it used to be back when a single word could mean life or death. Sergeant Frank Miller. Call sign, Echo 9. Operation Rising Storm, 1971. Silence. Then the voice came back, lower, sharper. Stand by. The line clicked again. For a moment, Frank thought it had dropped. But then, Miller, the voice said, deep and unmistakable. That you, old man? Frank gripped the phone tighter. Commander? Yeah. Morgan. You're alive, huh? Talk to me. Frank closed his eyes. I need the team. The pause that followed wasn't empty, it was full. Full of everything they never had to say out loud. And then, the answer. No hesitation. Already on the way. Click. Across the country, tiny signals began to light up. Quiet homes, quiet lives, awakened. In a modest house on the edge of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, former combat medic Jim Rice opened a locked box and pulled out an old pair of boots, a field jacket, and a tarnished medal. In Atlanta, Dennis Quinn, a retired recon captain, stood up from a half-finished chess game. He didn't explain, just said, I've got to go. No orders, no paperwork, just duty. One man pulled off his work gloves and left the garage light on. Another grabbed a duffel from a barn wall and started the engine. Someone else reached for a faded Unit 407 shirt, still folded after all these years, the eagle and ring of stars barely visible now. Nobody asked who, what, or why. Because long ago, they made a promise. If one called, the rest would come. Back in that empty park, beneath that weathered tree, Frank closed his phone and slipped it into his pocket. He didn't know who exactly would show up, but for the first time in a long time, he let himself believe they would. Didn't matter how many years had passed. Didn't matter how the world saw him now. To the men who'd been there with him, he was still their brother. The sun was dropping low behind the rooftops, casting the old park in deep amber light. The air thickened with a quiet stillness, like the moment just before a summer storm rolls in. Frank sat on the same bench as before, barely moving. His fingers slowly traced the edge of a frayed seam on his jacket. He wasn't watching the road. He didn't have to. He was waiting. 47 minutes after the call, the first black SUV rolled silently into the lot. No sound, no rush, just precision. Behind it came another. Then a third. By the time the fifth vehicle eased under the gnarled pine, the parking lot didn't feel like part of the town anymore. No bumper stickers, no vanity plates, just a subtle flag in the corner of each tag. And silence. Doors began opening. No slamming, no shouting. Just men, stepping out one by one. Some with silver hair, some walking with a cane, others wearing ball caps pulled low over steady eyes. Civilian clothes, but the walk? Still military. Straight-backed. Purposeful. That kind of posture doesn't come from drills. It's carved into bone by dirt, blood, and brotherhood. Frank didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could feel them. It wasn't a guess. It was certainty. The first to approach was tall, broad-shouldered, in a dark jacket, trimmed beard, eyes sharp like they'd never left the field. He knelt on one knee in front of Frank. "Sergeant Miller," he said, voice low and firm, like it was coming through an old field radio. "Unit 407, present and accounted for. Reporting is requested." Frank turned his head slowly. No smile touched his lips, but his eyes, something shifted in them. A flicker. A recognition older than words. "Morgan," he breathed. "You really came." Morgan stood, turned. The others followed, forming a quiet semicircle. No orders. Just instinct. Muscle memory from another life. "Always," he said simply. "We go together." Or not at all. They didn't posture. Didn't flex. Just stood there. And with every passing second, the air changed. A young father paused his stroller. A kid in a hoodie froze mid-step, gripping a basketball. No one knew what exactly was happening, but everyone felt it. Something important. Something you don't interrupt. Frank stayed seated, cane in hand, in the same posture as always. But now, he wasn't just an old man on a bench. He was the center, the anchor of something much larger than himself. He was the gravity pulling these men together. The memory made flesh. And the street he drove down that morning, unnoticed and alone, was now the place where something sacred returned. The men of Unit 407 didn't need medals to be seen. Their presence said enough. Their words still meant something. The roar of engines shattered the calm like a storm breaking loose. The same bikers who had laughed and shoved Frank just hours ago were back, revving louder, riding faster, cockier than before. Tires screeched across the grass. Dirt kicked up in messy clouds as they tore circles around the swing set. They didn't notice the men standing by the bench. Not right away. But then one of them, the one who had shoved Frank, turned and saw the semicircle of broad-shouldered, silver-haired men standing still as statues. His hand eased off the throttle. The engine coughed and fell silent. One by one, the others followed suit. Their bikes idled, then cut off completely. The men in black t-shirts stood motionless. No insignias, just the faint outline of an eagle wrapped in a ring of stars. They didn't move, didn't shout, didn't posture. They didn't need to. This wasn't a threat. It was presence. Heavy, unmistakable. "Who the hell are you guys?" One of the bikers rasped, trying for a smirk. "Some kind of vet circus?" His voice shook, though he tried to hide it. No one answered. Then a single step forward, Colonel Morgan. He moved deliberately, measuring the ground with each stride like a man who'd crossed more than one kind of battlefield. "You put hands on Sergeant Miller," he said, calm, clear, every word like the strike of a hammer. "A man who pulled wounded from open fire before you were even born. A man who brought 11 Americans home alive." A small crowd had begun to gather. Phones lifted. People stopped. A quiet ring of strangers formed, drawn by something they didn't yet understand. One of the bikers, the youngest, barely out of his teens, murmured, This some kind of stunt." But it wasn't Morgan who answered. From the circle stepped an older Korean man, silver streaks at his temples, Major Pak. He pulled a chain from around his neck, lifting a set of dog tags and a medal that caught the last slant of sunlight. "In 71, this man covered our flank while we got to the bird," he said. "I saw him take shrapnel and stay on his feet. I'm here today because of him. My daughter's alive because of him." Frank said nothing, didn't move, didn't even look up. He just sat there, present, the same way he'd always done his duty, quietly, without asking for anything in return. A man in the crowd took off his cap. A woman removed her sunglasses. The park fell into a hush, the kind of silence that feels like a prayer. The bikers, who just minutes ago had been so loud, stood frozen. The one who shoved Frank clenched his jaw, his arms limp at his sides. We didn't know," he said quietly. Morgan's gaze didn't waver. "That's the problem," he replied. "You didn't want to." Morgan stood facing the growing crowd around the bench. People had begun to gather from every corner of the park, some pushing strollers, others in work uniforms, a few already recording on their phones. The air felt heavier now, like it was holding its breath. Even the breeze seemed to hush, waiting to hear what the silver-haired man with the straight back and quiet fire in his voice had to say. You're all looking at a man, Morgan began, pointing toward Frank, who was laid hands on earlier today, for no reason, with no fear of consequences, simply because someone thought he looked weak. Frank still sat on the bench, hands resting on his knees, eyes cast low, watching the shadows under the trees. No reaction, no pride, no resentment. He sat the same way he'd once stood beside his brothers, solid, steady, unseen. This man, Morgan continued, isn't just a veteran. He's Sergeant Frank Miller. In 1971, during Operation Rising Storm, he pulled an entire squad out of enemy fire. Alone, on foot, under mortar barrage. Broken rib, shredded leg, he didn't stop until the last man was on the bird. Someone in the crowd put a hand over their mouth. He never asked for medals. He never demanded thanks. He just lived, quietly, among you. He pumped gas on Main Street. He waited in line at the pharmacy. He sat on this bench, and all of you walked past him. Morgan stepped forward. We all did. Another man stepped up beside Morgan, stocky, bruised-eye, wearing a civilian jacket. In his hands, a black case. He opened it. Inside, a gleaming silver star, resting on deep velvet. This is his medal, the man said. The original was lost in a move back in '86. We tracked it down through the department, restored the record. It took years, but we found it. And now, it's back where it belongs. He handed the case to Morgan, who gently placed it on Frank's knee. We didn't come back for revenge, Morgan said quietly. We came back to remind the world, to help you see what you never bothered to look at. The silence thickened. Even the bikers didn't move. The youngest, who had tried to explain himself earlier, now looked at the ground. An old man in the crowd removed his cap. A woman holding her baby followed. Then another, and another. And soon, half the park stood with heads bare, not in honor of a hero, but in front of a mirror held to their own conscience. And on the bench sat Frank, unchanged in posture, still as ever. But now, at the center of something he never asked for. Seen at last. From the hushed crowd, the youngest biker stepped forward, a skinny kid, maybe 19, with patchy stubble and eyes full of confusion. He looked like someone who'd wandered into a chapter of history he never meant to be part of. When he spoke, his voice cracked, barely louder than a whisper, barely a man. My granddad, he fought in Vietnam too. He swallowed hard. If he saw what I did today, he wouldn't even look at me. The silence grew heavier. Like even the birds had gone quiet. The boy lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. I really am. Frank looked at him. Not with anger. Not even disappointment. Just a long, steady silence. One of those silences that says more than words ever could. Then, slowly, he gave a small nod. Then be the kind of man, he said, your granddad could be proud of. The boy stood frozen, as if the weight of those words took a second to land. His lips trembled. And then he nodded back, just once. From the group of men, an officer stepped forward. No dress blues, just field fatigues. Worn, clean, exact. In his hands, a dark wooden case. He stopped in front of Frank and opened it. Inside lay a freshly minted silver star. The same one Frank had lost decades ago. Only now, it was back. Sergeant Miller, the officer said firmly. This award has been restored and officially reissued. Your actions were recognized long ago, but today they are honored. Thank you for your service. Frank took the medal, not like a prize, like something sacred returned to its rightful place. He didn't smile, but something lit in his eyes. I didn't serve for the medal, he said quietly. I didn't keep it for the medal. I kept it for the memory. He closed the case, held it against his chest, and for the first time in years, everyone finally saw him for who he'd always been. They just hadn't looked before. The small church on the corner of Elm Street had never seemed like much. A plain building, a crooked sign, creaky pews, just like 100 others scattered across small-town America. But that morning, the day after what happened in the park, its doors stood wide open. People came. No invites. No flyers. They came because deep down, they knew it was the right thing to do. That's where they asked Frank to go, not as a guest, but as someone the town needed to face. To say what hadn't been said in 50 years. It wasn't a formal ceremony. No marching band. No flag unfurled from the rafters. But the room was full of what mattered. Sincerity, remorse, and a silence deep enough to finally make room for truth. Frank sat in the front row. The shirt he wore wasn't his, but it was clean. The metal gleamed on his chest. Beside him sat the men of Unit 407, his brothers. His past, made flesh. His cap rested in his lap, hands folded calmly. He'd never liked the spotlight. But today he didn't look away. The town's mayor stepped up to the small wooden podium. A woman in a dark blazer, shoulders square, but voice trembling. She looked out over the crowd, veterans, school teachers, laborers, teens, grandparents, kids in their Sunday clothes. For 50 years, she began, Frank Miller lived right here among us. He filled his tank at the station down the road, sat on that bench in the park, walked past us on the sidewalk. And we didn't see him. We didn't look. We just kept going. She paused, as if trying to find the right words buried under the weight of too many years. Then someone decided they could shove him. And only then did we finally see, not just an old man, a hero, a man we let slip through the cracks. She turned slightly. Her eyes were glassy. Frank stood up. Slowly, cane in hand, one step at a time, he made his way to the microphone. The room fell absolutely still. Even the children hushed. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. I didn't make that call for recognition. I called my unit because I needed to remember who I was. Because I wanted to feel, just for a moment, like I was still part of something real. He paused. His voice was soft, but every word carried. I'm not angry. I don't hold a grudge. I just lived the best I could, quietly. But today, I'll ask one thing of you. He looked out across the crowd. Pay attention. Look closer at the ones you're quick to overlook. The man pushing a cart outside the grocery store. The woman sitting alone at the bus stop. They're not empty. They've got stories. And sometimes, there's more courage in them than you'd ever guess. He gave a small nod, took a step back, and just then, a little boy stepped out from the aisle. He held a bunch of wildflowers in one small, nervous hand. He walked up to Frank and held them out, uncertain. My dad says, real heroes don't show off, he whispered. Frank accepted the flowers, placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. Your dad's right, he said. And sometimes, to be a hero, you just have to not walk past. He turned back to the room. And in that moment, for the first time in many years, Frank Miller was no longer invisible. The sun rose slow over the rooftops, casting the old houses in a soft, golden light. But this morning felt different. Not because the sky had changed, but because something in the people had. Frank stepped out of his house like he always did, wearing his jacket, slightly hunched, his cane in his right hand. But this time, the scent of fresh paint met him on the porch. His pickup sat beneath the old oak tree. Only now, it didn't look tired anymore. The body was washed, polished, dents gone. That faded red paint now glowed with a deep, quiet dignity. The wheels shined like new. Tools and empty paint cans sat nearby, but there was no note. Someone had done it. And left. He walked closer. On the bumper, a new sticker, simple white letters on a black background. Veteran. Still standing. Frank ran his fingers over it. Not with pride, but with quiet acceptance. He hadn't asked for it, but he accepted it. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about every soul who came before him and went unseen. Across the street, his neighbor, a former trucker with burn scars on his arm, raised a hand in greeting. A boy on a scooter slowed down and gave a quick salute. Lorraine, the janitor from the auto shop, waved from her porch, coffee mug in hand. Even Todd, the mechanic, poked his head out of the garage and gave a nod. No words. Just that kind of respect that doesn't come from fear, but from finally understanding. A car rolled up slowly to the curb. Old, reliable. The kind Morgan trusted. He stepped out without hurry. No uniform. No speeches. Just a friend. Just a brother. You good? He asked, looking Frank in the eye. Frank glanced up at the sky. The clouds drifting above the old oak looked familiar. Not from the past, but from what the present had become. I think so, he said. Sometimes, you gotta fall, just so someone finally sees you. Morgan smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. You didn't fall, brother. You were standing the whole time. He placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. We just forgot to look up. They stood there in silence. The kind of silence only shared by those who've said it all. In war. In life. in memory, and in that silence, there was more strength than words could ever carry. If this story moved you, leave a like and hit subscribe. Here at Heartland Stories, we honor real people, the quiet ones, the strong ones, the ones who go unnoticed, but are worthy all the same. Until next time, and may the next story be a kind one.